Hey guys, this is Sarah Valley. I'm gonna go over our part one of our social media branding class. You'll be getting a part two from Aaron Stearns that will actually be a live recording of his class. But I'm just going to be going through my slides and my notes for you guys. We can also make these notes available if you guys need them to follow along, but I'm going to leave them up on the screen as well as we go through the slides. So essentially, we're going to be covering a few different case studies of different brands on social media uh, who all have very different strategies in terms of how they approach their brand on social media and creating content that's in sync with their brand and engaging to their audience on social media. When we talk about a brand just in general, I like to think about a brand as your identity. From a design standpoint, it can be your logo, your stylistic elements, the editing of your photography, your color system, your font system. From a communication standpoint, it's the use of your language and tone, your core values. From an environmental standpoint, it can be a storefront, signage, furniture, building materials, lighting choices, and your customer experience. And ideally, all of these elements will come together with cohesion so that they feel like they belong to one identity, and that identity is your brand. Your audience is going to form an opinion about who you are and what they think your brand is, regardless of how you present it. So it's your responsibility and your opportunity to create a really consistent brand and really inform and influence how your audience perceives you and interacts with you. Um, yeah, I forgot to go to that first slide. That's okay. So moving on to the next slide, what is social media branding? When we talk about social media branding, we're talking about how all of those brand elements exist on your social platforms, whether that's Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. We'll see in some of our case studies how different brands utilize those differently and how some brands will choose to use one social platform and not another because they're tuning into what their audience is active on. Effective social media branding will mean consistently using the right methods to engage with the right audience. And that's really what we're going to cover today. You'll hear me harp over and over again about consistency, just as a designer and from a brand standpoint, but on social media as well because it's a part of your brand. Consistency is so important because it ultimately is a thing that builds trust and expectation within your audience. The best way to be consistent with your message is to be consistent with how you deliver it. And that's where all of those brand elements come into play. Every brand element you have is an opportunity to be consistent with your message. And when consistency is paired with a positive experience from your audience, that builds trust and loyalty. And trust and loyalty with an audience ultimately builds engagement and awareness of your brand. And I just did write a little disclaimer down here. I think it goes without saying that there's no foolproof method to engage with your audience, to, to sell a product, to grow a following. There's a lot of trial and error that will go into figuring out what works for your brand and for your audience. A lot of elements outside of branding really have an impact too. Some brands thrive on Instagram and get zero engagement on Facebook. Some brands get the best response when they post 3 times a day. Some don't see any benefit from this. You have to be attentive and responsive and adaptive to trends you see with your engagement. So I'm going to give you guys all this information today, but it's still going to be your responsibility to walk away and just do a lot of experimenting and figure out what works. So 3 points that we're going to hit in each case study is going to be knowing your brand, first of all. What are your values? What's your message? If you're an individual, if you're a nonprofit, if you're a business, it doesn't matter. You have a message that your brand is built on. Sometimes it's activism, religion, social justice. You just want to be an inspiration and an influencer. You want to build your platform on humor and entertainment. Regardless of what your goals are, you have to know the core of your brand. You can be a huge company like Nike who wants to sell a product but bases their marketing on social justice, or a company like Netflix who's equally as huge and bases all of their marketing around humor and entertainment. So again, just what are your values? What message are you spreading? You have to know that. And the next one is going to be know your audience. Who is your message for? Is it women? Is it men? Is it kids? Is it teens? Is it young adults? Is it families? Whatever it is, be as specific as you can be. And once you understand who your audience is, you can make the best content for them. And I really emphasize putting these two in that particular order, knowing your brand and then knowing your audience. If you seek to know your audience first, then your brand's never going to feel authentic. You want your brand to be authentic and true to who you are, and then know the audience that's going to best receive that brand. Okay, so now moving on to creating consistent content. This is where a lot of the trial and error that I talked about is going to start to come into play. You being attentive to what your target audience is and isn't responsive to, and then operating that within an authentic set of parameters of who your brand is. And also just wanted to make a reminder about consistency, since we're going to talk about it a lot, is that I don't think that consistency equals boundaries. I think that consistency equals a set of standards. So you have a set of standards that you never budge from, so that could be like, oh, your logo, your font, your color, your tone of voice, your identity, all those things that we talked about. But you stay open to your brand growing and adjusting and growing and adjusting within those standards that you've decided to be consistent. And a really good example of that we're going to talk about is just a company like Netflix. Like, if you logged on to Netflix tomorrow and their logo was blue, like, that would be ridiculous. You know that Netflix red, you know that Netflix in. That's kind of a standard that they hold, but they're still always growing and changing with the content that they're putting out within those standards. So we're going to move on to our case studies. Our first case study is going to be Nike. They use Instagram and Twitter primarily. Twitter is barely used. Facebook is basically never used. But their Instagram is where they really push a lot. So if we talk about knowing your brand with Nike, so that would be their message. So their message is thought-provoking. It taps into social justice and representation. They're socially and politically on trend. They challenge expectations. They emphasize strength and diversity. Their audience are millennials, athletes, and anyone who is socially aware. Consistent content that they're putting out. So they have an iconic logo, they have recognizable photography content that is people focused and a really recognizable editing style, and their tone of voice and their language is very consistent. And so we're going to dive in a little bit into their Instagram. That's what we're going to focus on for Nike. So just touching on their language, we see this in their bio, and bio really is an important part. It's like the first impression when someone comes to your page, your bio and your highlights, and I love that they're so consistent here. Their language is very much inspiring and empowering, but you'll never see them use an exclamation point. They will always use periods. They're very matter of fact. So their thing reads, "If you have a body, you're an athlete." Period. You will see that on all of their captions, on all of their videos, on any marketing that they put out. That is their tone of voice. It's inspiring. It's motivating. It's a matter of fact. Then that just plays into their mantra. Just do it. It's just matter of fact. It just is what it is. And they're so consistent with that across the board. They One thing I was going to note is that Nike builds social campaigns that are really clearly intended to inspire, but their ultimate goal is to still use all of this language, this logo, this look and feel. They use all of it to ultimately build loyalty and to make a sell. But that doesn't mean that their content isn't authentic, and that doesn't mean that their standards are authentic. It's just a highly strategic set of rules for their promotion that they fall back on. And so they know that they have this thing that they believe in, and they know that they have an audience that believes in it. And so their strategy comes in just matching their belief system with an audience who has the same belief system. And ultimately, that does help them to generate sales. So we're going to move on and see how they are reinforcing their logo and their photography styles that really builds recognizability. So I've just taken a few photos from their Instagram account, and you'll see like a really consistent editing style, something that's very people focused, very athlete focused, very diverse. You'll see like you have a woman in hijab, you have different women doing different things, you have different men doing different things, different races, different genders. They really encompass everything, and they have this really inclusive mindset that their audiences come to know them for. And so, like, even here, we'll see this caption on this one again. Don't just dream of a place on the podium, dream of a place in history. Again, just periods, always has their mantra, always a photo of an athlete who is relatable and diverse, always. They use Instagram over anything else, and that's where they're best able to engage with their primarily younger audience. So much of their content is visual, so Twitter doesn't really have the same impact. If you go to their Twitter, they're just reposting stuff from their Instagram, and they don't get a lot of engagement there, and so they just don't post there very often. So we'll move on next to Netflix. Netflix is actually very active on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, but they deal with all of these things in completely different ways based on different audiences who are in those platforms. And so if we talk about knowing your brand, Netflix's purpose truly is just to create hype from fans. If you talk about knowing their audience, they have an easy way to know their audience. They can look at their viewership, so they know that their audience is primarily adults aged 18 to 40. If we talk about consistent content, they have a recognizable logo, a recognizable color palette, a young and casual tone, and they reinforce imagery from stream content. It varies slightly between the three platforms. Uh, they're primarily geared towards a younger crowd, which they hit really heavy on Instagram and Twitter. Twitter pushes a lot of meme-based language to encourage reposting. Instagram also puts a lot of meme-based content. But on Facebook, they mostly just post pretty well-produced videos. It's really interesting to see the difference between their Facebook content and their Instagram and Twitter content, because they know that their Facebook audience is older, and they don't push the meme content as hard. They put a lot of like well-produced videos of things that say like now streaming, whereas on their Instagram or Twitter, as we'll see as we go through them, it's a lot of truly low quality, highly repostable content. Um, so even here we look at their bio, right? And it's like an inside joke. It's like if you don't watch that show and know who that person is, that caption isn't funny to you, right? But I love that. They really push this inclusivity that makes you feel like you want to be a part of it. Which like really taps into millennial culture when you think about things like FOMO, like fear of missing out. Like they really play into like these cultural moments, and they push it really hard, and I think it works really well for them. Um, if you go look at the things that they're posting, it's memes. It's like meme, and so it's just it's memes that they're generating based on their shows, because they know that that's what's going to work for them on Instagram. I love this one. This one cracks me up because they do a really great job of promoting one new show that's on their streaming service and one older show that's on their streaming service, and tapping into fans who really care about these shows and will want to repost this and will want to comment on this and will want to engage with this. It's just so smart, so clever to me, because they just really understand their audience, and they don't have to have this highly produced content. They can just take screenshots and clip it together and know that their audience is going to love it. And same for Twitter. They post things that are funny, that you want to retweet, that you want to share. Um, and I just love Netflix as an example, because it's such a stark difference from Nike, where you come to expect quality with Nike. Everything Nike puts out is quality. Everything they put out is well produced. And that really ties into the audience experience. Whereas on Netflix, yes, Netflix is selling a product, but they're selling a product that everyone already has. They're selling a product you can only sell to every person once. And so their biggest goal is just to keep their users interested. And they do such a good job with engaging with them. So we're going to move on to one more small example. So we're going to cover Secret Gardens. Secret Garden is connected to Hillsong. They're they post like a video series for women and for young women, um, and they only live on Instagram. The reason that I really wanted to feature them is because the things that they're putting out are very underproduced. It's a lot of borrowed content, so they're not having to generate a lot of original content. They don't have a strong set of brand standards that they're necessarily pushing, but they know who they are, and they have a really clear identity, and they do a good job of building a brand with very little, but it still very clearly feels like a brand. And I think it's a great job of how to still build a mood and still how to still identify yourself without a ton of original content that you're putting out. Which they do, and again, they do put out original content. They do a video series, but just in terms of how they promote that video series and how they promote their website on social. They do it with, like I said, with a lot of borrowed content, and I think it's really smart, it's really clever, and just a great example of how you can do a lot with a little and still get a lot of buy-in. So if we talk about their message is setting a standard for sincere, vulnerable conversation about womanhood. That's really what their content is driven on, and they do a good job of reinforcing that on their page. Their audience, in my opinion, is probably young women. And in terms of consistent content, like I was saying, there's not a strong use of a logo or a color palette, and a lot of their content is really based on a mood and a visual and a verbal language that feels very personal and very unproduced. So just such a stark difference from a company like Nike, but really kind of relying on some of the same standards that a brand like Netflix, even though much larger and with a much different purpose, kind of fall back on is being able to use very unproduced content in a way that still garners engagement. We look at their bio, and their bio is truly just a link to their website where you'll see the videos and some highlights. And then as we get into their feed itself, this is kind of what I'm talking about. So if I were to guess which of this content is original content, I would have to go look closely. I would say maybe these two is content that they produce themselves. I would assume that images like this and this and this, and again, I could be totally wrong, but I'm assuming that a lot of these images are images that were either found on Pinterest and reposted or reposted from someone else on Instagram, things like that. Same here, we get a couple more examples. So this is one example on the left of content that they produce themselves. And this is an example on the right of content that is borrowed content that they found somewhere else. And I think both feel engaging and both feel really fun and lighthearted, which is kind of just true to who they are. The mood that they're putting out is just very fun and lighthearted and relatable and repostable. One thing I will make a note of, if you are going to post borrowed content, just make sure you are always citing your source, and if you don't have a source, don't post it. That's the one tenet of a strategy like this. And so, like, you'll even see here, they posted this and someone mentioned, hey, I didn't see you guys cite a source, but I know who this is, here's your source, and then they cited it. Just make sure you guys are doing that on the front end if you're ever in a situation where you're posting borrowed content. And I don't see any issue with it when you're someone like this who's really trying to create a mood. Just make sure you always credit an artist, credit a source, all of that. Otherwise, I think it's great. I think they do a really incredible job of that. And again, they live solely on Instagram, and with all of these people that we talked about, Secret Garden, Netflix, Nike, I encourage you guys to go look at their Instagram accounts, go look at their Twitter accounts. These are really small snapshots of a case study, and so you guys should go really get the full picture and see what I'm talking about and go back over these notes with it. And I encourage you guys to kind of take this system that we've created of knowing your brand, knowing your audience, and creating consistent content, and going and doing some of your own research for brands that you feel really excited about, and kind of understand the formula that they're using, and just figure out how you can apply that for yourselves. We all have a lot to learn from one another, and just even understanding this simple formula will help you do that and help you set yourself up well. So again, just remember, know your brand, know your audience, and create consistent content. Okay, that's it. I'm done, guys. Thank you so much.